So my name is Jamie McMahon. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here for ProServeIT, and really my role is to help other organizations be empowered. So first and foremost, why should we care as executives? And I think that it's easy to think of that from a technology perspective. If I'm in fundraising, if I'm in finance, what does security mean to me? But for us at ProServeIT, we think of technology as far more than just servers and network and Wi-Fi. We see it as a framework upon which that you have to look at your entire business, your entire organization, the foundation of which starts with security. So security, if your security foundation isn't there, everything above that is at risk, is at jeopardy of not being executed effectively. On top of security, you're going to have your traditional infrastructure. These are things that would have been consistently called IT in the past. We also have departmental applications, things like your finance applications, sales applications, fundraising applications, perhaps. Your core business application will actually probably be your fundraising application or your mission application, whichever application is kind of that critical app, the one app to rule them all, so to speak. And then you have your productivity applications that provide all of your efficiencies and effectiveness from a business perspective. Your brand experience is how technology is realized or experienced from both your internal customers, i.e. your employees, volunteers, etc., as well as your external employees, i.e. your customers, your donors, or anyone else that you engage with and provide your services for. And finally, all of that on top, everything below that story provides assets in the form of data. And that data allows us to create automation, allows us to extract insights, to make intelligent business decisions. And the challenge is because all the assets exist below, that's really what's at risk from a business perspective. And without that foundational security element in place, as I said, there's a jeopardy of you performing the mission that you're attempting to perform. So how often does the average organization face a cyber attack each year? And this is a target attack, and I don't mean spam emails, things of that nature. And the data tells us that it's upwards of 186 attacks per year that the average organization faces. That's one every other day. It's a staggering amount and kind of scary, really. And when we think about that, what does that mean today? I always ask the question, how has your security perimeter changed? And what are your opportunities to improve your security? So I'm going to frame this in an analogy, and hopefully this will help us understand, digital security from an executive perspective. What we have here in front of us is Bamberg Castle. It's a castle in northern England that was effectively thought of as the pinnacle of security for a very long time. As you can see, it's right by the ocean. It's gorgeous. It's built on a hill. It's got very high walls. Those walls are very thick. It's well supplied. It's got a port on the other side of it. And for centuries, it was basically impregnable. Nobody could attack it. Nobody could breach the walls. No one could defeat the castle. And the people inside that castle felt very secure. Until one day during the War of the Roses, somebody invented, not invented gunpowder, but they combined gunpowder with iron balls. And the cannonball basically was the first time that this castle was breached. And from that point onward, those walls were effectively no longer useful. They didn't really provide the same type of security that the owners and landlords once thought they did. And when we take that analogy and think about that in terms of our business, let's think about how our perimeters changed. Once upon a time, we would have been very happy with deploying a firewall, having antivirus on my machine and thinking, you know what, I'm great, I'm protected because I've got those two things in place and I can feel comfortable. Maybe I have a VPN. However, in kind of the modern world, the challenge is that all of your assets, if we go back to the house, all of the data that you have, the things that are valuable exist everywhere. They exist in the cloud. They exist on multiple devices. They exist in applications that you have both on-premise and in the cloud. You've got data that sits in probably multiple different file places. We're working from home a lot more now, so that the whole perimeter and having those firewalls, it's moot now, right? And so in this kind of new paradigm where data is everywhere and data is king, what can we do to protect ourselves as executives? So let's think about, and I'm just going to build this out. Let's think about some of the common concerns that I hear from executives. And it's, what would that be, the impact to your brand be if we'd had a major cyber attack? What happens if our data is accessed and violated? Do we have any ramifications? Are there any punitive things in place with agreements that we have with organizations? What's the risk to the employees or volunteers that we service or their families if any private data is accessed? And at the end of the day, what would the financial impact be? What would the impact be to your mission? How many less people would you be able to impact, in the event of a cyber incident? So just looking at the data, this is from last year actually, and it's pretty crazy to me actually that 32% of all targeted attacks impact non-governmental organizations, people like NGOs, nonprofit organizations and such. And the reason is, unfortunately, those tend to be the most underfunded when it comes to security. They're the easiest target. And it's not to say that the charities themselves have lots of money and these criminals are trying to extract money from, directly from the charity. However, most charities work with well-funded individuals, well-funded organizations, and it's quite often that those are the people that are actually at risk. So it's not your charity, but they're using your charity to reach your donors, reach your fundraisers, reach your organizations that you partner with, and the risk is transitive through you to those organizations. And why is that the case? And again, I'm just going to build this out. It's a bit of a busy slide, but I'm just going to focus your eyes on the bottom right here. The risk is that basically cyber attacks, cybersecurity, the people executing these, it's a business. And what they try and do is they try and maximize the reward and minimize their effort, so to speak, right? And therein lies their ROI formula. And if you look at this and say, okay, from a business perspective, for example, criminals can go and purchase compromised accounts on the internet for as low as $1 for 1,000 confirmed accounts. So usually those are public services like Facebook or LinkedIn or accounts like that where passwords have been exposed in some place, and those are what's for sale. And the challenge is, for example, and here's where our personal and corporate lives are mixing and why we as executives in particular are at risk, is it's kind of psychology. Many people will just intuitively use the same password or just a few passwords they'll rotate through for both their personal and corporate lives. And if, for example, you've used your corporate email address to sign up for a personal service, the odds are that you've probably used the same or a variation of your corporate password for that public service. And that's what these criminals really zero in on as an example in the bottom right here. The other thing they take advantage of is psychology. So for example, for passwords, we all have this illusion that passwords will keep us safe. And the data shows us that, most sites require a capital letter, 8 letters, and maybe a number. And what that means is that most of us pick a password. It begins with a capital. It's a word of eight letters long or so. It ends in number 1. And if it requires a special character, that special character is right at the end and it's an exclamation mark. And that's the challenge, because that's an illusion of security. That's not actually security. So let's look at some of the impact. And so obviously, I think it's easy for us to see on the news lots of data around how much these incidents cost large organizations, millions of dollars. And it's easy for us to go, well, that's not relevant to me. I'm not Coca-Cola, or I'm not picking on Coke, but some large organization. But what the data shows is that for smaller organizations, small businesses and charities fit in this bucket. The impact of a breach is around, it starts at $250,000 and kind of goes up from there depending on how bad or significant the breach is. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money in terms of impact to your mission and what you're trying to do. And I think it's all of our responsibility to try and see what we can do to prevent that type of thing from happening. So that leads me to the checklist, an action item. So what can we actually do to protect ourselves from a business stakeholder perspective? So first and foremost, we need to identify our corporate data crown jewels. We need to know what data of ours is most important. For some of us, that might mean donor data. For others, that might mean employee payroll data. For others, that might mean partners or organizations that we have business relationships with and who the key contacts are at those business relationships for people to exploit. But whatever it is, we need to know first where the risk is, what's most important or valuable to an attacker. We also need to think about corporate and personal security passwords and standards. So I mentioned before the correlation between your personal cyber lives and your corporate cyber lives, the fact that most of us have just a small amount of passwords that we kind of cycle through, that there's some relation or correlation between the passwords you use in our personal lives as well as the passwords we use in our corporate lives. And therefore, it's important that we have password standards not just for our corporate lives, but also our personal lives. And what many people have been doing for sites that do require passwords, we've been recommending doing passphrases instead. So, 3 words that are joined together that in isolation mean nothing, they're not related, but combined they create a really long word that is easy for you to remember. And maybe it's something like bottle, mouse, watch. And that, that's about a 15-letter password. That's 3 random words tied together, and it becomes very difficult to breach. Other people use a trick where they take one of their favorite pictures from a family and pick on 3 specific items in that picture, and that becomes a more visual reminder of what your password is because you remember those items in the picture. Corporate and personal multi-factor authentication. This is probably the most important thing that you can do for all of the services that you subscribe to. So multi-factor authentication, what that means is that when you have to sign up or log into a website or log into an application, if it's the first time that you've signed into that application or if you haven't used it in a while, the application will probably send you a text message with a PIN, and you've got to enter in that PIN in addition to your password to access the application. This prevents 99% of all identity-based breaches and is really, really effective at making an impact and protecting you. So highly, highly recommend this. And this is also a habit that you should subscribe to for all of your personal services, any banks that you use, email, Facebook, etc. All of that stuff needs to be protected, and this is, at the moment, probably the easiest and most effective way to do that. Protect your SIM cards. We've been seeing incidences lately of where people will try and hijack your phone basically by going into a phone dealer saying, hey, I lost my phone. Can I buy a new phone? And can you transfer my SIM card to this new phone? And they'll basically impersonate you. So an easy thing for you to do is just, contact your phone provider, put a PIN on that, and that will help you. Use a corporate or personal password application. I've just thrown a couple on here. It's just a really good habit, again, to not stick posties on your monitor, but also to make sure that your life is organized and you can access it and it's in a secure fashion. Cybersecurity insurance. So this is relevant from a business perspective, first party or third party. First party protects yourself, third party protects organizations that you work with. So it's just a recommendation to evaluate the relevance of this to you. There are identity monitoring services. This is more on the personal side, so we think it is a good idea to have personal monitoring services tied to both your credit and identity. Set up procedures for any wires or payroll updates. So if you've got, if it's as easy as an employee emailing you and saying, hey, here's my new banking information, can you make sure my next payroll goes up to this bank? Make sure you've got some way to verify that that person that sent that email is actually your employee and not someone impersonating your employee, and so that there's no nasty surprise when next payroll hits and they don't actually get paid and someone else gets paid in their spot. Same goes for any partners that you work with for services. If you're paying them, if they're in, you make sure you've got some way to verify that the bank that's being provided is actually going to the company that you're doing business with. Change all of your default passwords. And I say this especially in this remote world that we're all living in right now. unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but the reality is that we're all working from home, and so our home is our office, and our office is now part of our corporate security strategy. And quite often, all of us have internet at home that we have some kind of a default password for, and we need to make sure that that default password for that modem is not the factory default password, because what that means is any criminal on the internet will have access to your firewall and can get into, you know, what they need to get into. So please change your passwords for your devices at home. Finally, last recommendation is to subscribe to a digital alarm service. So we think about this in the old world, so to speak, where we would have a alarm system they put in our business, on our actual physical facilities, and it would protect us to an extent to let us know when people are breaking in. We need that same type of a service from a digital perspective so that you have the same type of alarm triggered if someone is trying to get in. And we think this is a really, really good way to provide awareness and protection over your digital assets. And this is kind of, but I will say thank you very much for your time. I hope that the session's been valuable. Please let me know if you have any questions. Again, you can reach myself, Jamie, at cloud@proserveit.com. That's PROSERVEIT.com. And I'd be happy to answer any of your digital cyber questions that you may have. Thanks very much.